Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Kate Glenister. I'm one of the publishers working on the new editions of Oxford Humanities, and I'm really excited to have you all here with us. Of course, we would have preferred to do it in person, but very grateful to you all for spending even more time on your screen and coming to join us today. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. Me personally, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, whose land on which I'm located, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. Just some housekeeping before we begin. Your microphones and cameras are muted throughout the session, but we do have a chat going, so you can post questions and comments during the chat, and at the end we will also pick out a few questions to discuss with Megan and Kirk. Also, you guys as teachers will be no strangers to this. We are doing this digitally, so bear with us if there are a few tech hiccups or you see a cameo from a family member in the background or something. So just a quick rundown of today's session. I'll hand over to Megan and Kirk in just a minute, and they will take you through parts 1 to 4 of this session, including a really great case study about how important it is to embed skills from history from year 7 upwards, and sort of how it lays the foundations for what happens in BCE. Even though today's session is focused on history, Megan and Kirk are also going to be making really great points about how this applies to humanities at large. That being said, if you find yourself wanting a bit more maybe on geography, we do have a webinar on demand for that as well, which there's some more information about at the end of the session. So I'll pop back at the end, give an overview of the upcoming Oxford Humanities series, including the features and the pricing information, and then we'll conclude with questions. So it's my pleasure now to introduce you to Megan Ryan and Kirk Thompson. Kirk and Megan are both history teachers currently teaching at St Bede's College in Mentone. They both have a wealth of experience teaching from year 7 through to BCE, which has positioned them as passionate skills experts who want to develop students' ability to transfer skills through history units. They've both presented at the History Teachers Association Victoria conference since 2019, and just to give a little plug, they will be presenting there together next Thursday from 3:10 to 4 p.m. in a great session called Skills to Save You in the Senior Years. So without further ado, over to you, Kirk and Megan.
Thank you, Kate. So yes, my name is Kirk Thompson and this is Megan Ryan. Today we are going to be talking about the skills that have been, for us, the main focus with this new edition of the 7 to 10 Oxford University Press textbook. We really appreciate you all taking the time to spend another hour or so with us online, like you, we're teachers as well, and so we've been online with our students all day as well. So really appreciate another hour with your eyes on the screen, and so we hope that you get something out of this session. To get us started, we will talk about how history is most relevant in today's classroom more than ever. We see that we can make connections with the current COVID situation with something like the Black Death. Sorry for the little lag on the screen there. You can see that COVID is a real discussion that we can have with our students about moments from the past. Another example we can see is, of course, we could be talking about something like Indigenous rights and the fight for that right, and again talking about things like the Tent Embassy moments from 1972, and then again what connections that has with the current climate as well.
Yeah, another great example is the environmental movement, and this one here is particularly relevant for our students, I guess. You can see this protest happening in 1970 and all the kids that are involved in the protest movement, because we know how powerful, a student voice can be. And then we've got the protest that happened this year for the strike against climate change. This is another really modern example as well. We've got the Black Lives Matter protests happening in Washington, and then you've got the March on Washington with Martin Luther King in the 60s. So we're really lucky that we've got this wealth of information and history that we can pull from. We can make our subject really relevant to our students. I guess the main focus of what we wanted to talk about today was these pinch points that we have in the classroom. And I guess pinch points are these struggles that we all have as teachers, these things that make our classes a bit more challenging, or things that can get in the way of us trying to do our very best. Our first sort of pinch point, and I know I'm very guilty of this often, is that whenever we look at a history course, we go straight to the content. You open up the Vic curriculum and you say, great, we're studying ancient Egypt, or we're looking at World War I or World War II. And sometimes it's very easy to forget that there's skills content in there as well that we have to cover. And skills are really important. They're the things that are the underlying theme of all our classes, whether you're teaching at year 7 or year 10 or year 9 or wherever it is. So really emphasising that to our students and making sure that we're teaching a consistent language across year levels as well.
Another pinch point that we will clearly face as humanities teachers is time being an issue within our classrooms. Time, whether it means that we might only have a semester to teach history in a year level, or even a term at certain schools as well, when sometimes we have a whole year worth of content and skills that we would love to get through. So that is something that we consider, time being an issue, and so therefore we try to factor that into the current editions coming out next year, considering what is it about these editions we can include to have some sort of consistency between year levels and textbooks, so that if we don't have enough time to teach, say, all the skills in year 8, we still have faith that they were taught at a lower level at year 7 and they will continue to be used in year 9, because in the end, that's the consistent approach throughout the textbooks. It's the skills that keep that have that consistency. Yeah, it's the content, of course, we can still reflect upon, but that is ever changing.
I think particularly as a VCE teacher as well, you know, when students get to, you know, year 11 and year 12, you're always time poor. And so if you can have faith in other year levels that they've taught the skills throughout, it puts less pressure on the VCE teacher because they're not starting from scratch. They've got that base that's been built up the previous years. The last pinch point we had was the mixed ability classroom. And this can mean lots of different things. You know, it can mean we have students with additional needs. It can mean that we have students who are just at different areas of their life as well, which we know affects them in the classroom. We're very unique in humanities that we teach literacy and numeracy, and they're quite complicated skills and quite challenging for lots of students. I think at the moment as well, I know in my classroom, I'm seeing this big divide in my class as well about students who really struggle with online learning, and some of them who are doing nothing during online learning, and those students who are really excelling during online learning, and they're doing all their work and they're using it as an opportunity to catch up. And so we've got not just, you know, learning difficulties, but we've got students who are just in different places because of that.
So there's been opportunity to look at how we can actually address mixed ability classrooms within the textbook itself. And so that's where you'll see a little bit later examples of this, but there are visible learning prompts that are throughout the new edition of the textbook. So we can ask students to actually discuss with each other. So again, those mixed ranged ability students can talk to each other about what they see, or what they, I mean, some of the visible learning prompts are, I used to think, now I think. So therefore it allows them to have those hopefully rich discussions and learn from each other too.
Absolutely. So I guess the next thing we wanted to have a bit of a look at is why skills are actually so important. And as history teachers, we know that skills are important. We know that they're really vital, but it's backed up in the curriculum. You know, here's a little excerpt from the Victorian curriculum.
So I'm going to support what Megan said earlier, because I'm guilty of it too, where in those first 2 years probably of teaching, I would also go on the Victorian curriculum straight to the content as well and miss this ever important skills section. I know that's something that's repeated at VCE webinars as well, whereby it is not just about the content that's there, but also the skills and the historical skills that we need to address as well. So we see here, just looking at this sample in itself, we can see there's plenty of command terms there in yellow. And so again, a lot of students might see this and be a little bit confused as to the difference between them. Something like analyze and evaluate, what's the difference between these terms? Explain. And so if students are confused and we're confused, then that's why sometimes there isn't a real consistency between the year levels. So taking that on board.
We've got this sort of new approach as well that we've got, which is the spiral approach, which is something that we've really tried to address in the new Oxford range of textbooks. And I guess it's based on the fact that skills aren't learned overnight. And a student's not going to get to year 12 and suddenly know how to do a source analysis or write an essay. Those skills really start in the early years, and then you can scaffold them through. And it's really important as well that these skills are revisited over and over again. You know, it's not just something that's brought up in one class as a one-off thing. It's something that comes up over and over again, so students become familiar with the language and they know what to expect as well. Go for it.
So with this spiral approach, year 7 level, what we see is that students are going to be, and we're going to show you examples of this in the next section, but students will be introduced to the real simple terms, the command terms that ask them just to do things such as identify what's happening in sources and questions. Again, it doesn't mean that those skills aren't then used. Those same command terms are used as we move up the spiral approach. But for now, it's just usually identifying and commenting on what they can see.
Yeah, and really just introducing them to history as well. You know, lots of students have done it in primary school, but making them fall in love with our subject, making them want to be in that room, and then you can build on those more challenging things later. I guess at year 8, the next step is to build on those skills that they've already learned at year 7, and they feel confident because they know they've already done a little bit of it and they're just sort of building on that knowledge, which is really great. And that's where you get students really wanting to be in the classroom because they're engaged by the content, plus they feel like they already know something and then they can build on it from there.
At year 9, for example, we might start actually applying those skills perhaps by comparing different components of history. We compare different moments or different sources, for example, and we actually can then use that history and actually comment on it in a more broader sense. Then at possibly year 10 level, that's where we might start making things like judgment calls and again, actually apply those skills, not just within the content that were delivered there, but we might even be starting to look beyond the classroom and looking at a bit more contemporary subjects and again, using those historical skills we've learned from there and again in VCE to confidently tackle not just the humanities course, VCE course, but of course, then look at what else is happening outside the classroom and they're the skills they take into the real world.
Yeah, so this is the goal. This is having students, you know, where it's scaffolded all the way up to VCE. Students are learning things along the way. They feel confident. They feel happy in our classrooms, which is really what we want.
So I guess we're going to start by showing you some of those command terms that we were using throughout the new textbook. When we were tasked with updating the current edition, this was the first step that we did with updating it, which was to address every question throughout the whole textbook and actually put a bit of a spin on it by using consistent task words throughout from 7 to 10. It then means then that you can see on the right-hand side, there's a bit of a difficulty associated with each of the terms. So it means then that we were using these, again, just because identify might be a low order skill, it doesn't mean it's not in year 8 and year 9 and year 10, but it just means that we've introduced it bit more broadly and consistently at year 7, for example, so that we can then build on those skills the higher we go up through the spiral approach of year levels.
Yeah, and all these words as well, these task words have been pulled from the Victorian curriculum, but also the VCE study designs at VCE. So we know these words appear all the time. They're the things that are consistent, you know, throughout the curriculum, whether it's a VCE curriculum you're looking at or whether it's the Victorian curriculum. I think the ranking as well is really helpful for us as teachers, but for students as well. You know, recognising that it's actually quite challenging to ask students to evaluate something or get them to think about to what extent and asking them for that range. You know, if they can see that development through the years that they're going up through these task words, it's quite a powerful tool for them as well. So I guess we'll start at year 7. At year 7, we've got an example here of a source analysis. And I think source analysis is something that lots and lots of students struggle with, particularly at VCE. You know, we see that year in, year out throughout the statistics that come out of the revolutions and Australian history exams. So at year 7, what I'd be hoping that my students would be able to do is really be able to identify what's in that image, but also be able to describe some of the elements as well that may be separate from it, but sort of linked to it. As well, that first question up there, you've got something that's really basic, like identify if this is a primary or secondary source. But it's a really important skill that often, you know, kids get to year 10 and year 9, but they don't know what a primary and secondary source is, or they still struggle to do those basic identification. So if we're able to really address that in year 7 and really just focus on that skill, then students will definitely benefit later on.
If we look at that first question as well, the identify this as a primary or secondary source, if we consider what it would have been worded as in the current editions, it would probably ask something like, is this a primary or a secondary source? And the student would only really answer yes or no. So there's real simple answers there from the student. So by giving a command term, it actually means that the student is they're forced to write this as a sentence. This is a primary source. This is a secondary source. So hopefully it means that there's meaning when a student looks back at their own work or writing, because they're seeing that they've written sentence forms, not just yes, no answers, because then again, that doesn't have any meaning. They can't use that to revise or plan for any upcoming assessment tasks. I know even as a year 12 history teacher, we see that in the source analysis section of the exam, we have students analysing visual and written sources. And I know it's not new knowledge to us, but the fact that sometimes it's the written sources that they might do a little bit stronger in, because they clearly identify that they have to pull out phrases from the written form, yet the visual sources, they don't sometimes do the real basics, which is just simply identify and describe what is happening, like literally what is happening in that source.
Yeah.
So if they get those skills from the year 7 level, hopefully they can recall them later as well.
Yeah, and being able to look at a source in detail, we take that for granted as well often, that students are able to do that at senior year levels, whereas we need to take the time to teach them that at year 7 and 8. Being able to look at the source and look at the colours and be able to look at particular characteristics and what they represent. Down the bottom there as well, I've got some describe questions. You'll notice that they're linked to the image. Just describe the role of a gladiator. We know that there are gladiators in this image, but it's not necessarily asking students to link their knowledge from the image to that question. It's just saying describe the role of a gladiator, not describe the role of a gladiator in this source, because that's a much more challenging question that you'd see probably a bit later on. At year 8, we'd hope that our students have really got a pretty good knowledge of identifying and describing within a source, and they might get some more complicated ones like the ones you can see here. And I guess what makes these questions a bit more complex is they ask students to look at 2 command words in one question. So not only do they have to describe something from the source or describe the tradespeople they can see in this image, but they also have to explain their role in the image. So that means that they have to look at that image, identify something within it, then they're taking the next step to describe and then explain. All right, so it's not like we're losing this identify and describe entirely, we're just building on it in the next few levels up.
And hopefully that even term explain, like Megan was just saying with describing the role of it, not necessarily in the source, yet explaining is actually starting to justify why something is actually happening or give a reason behind why it's happening. So we're calling upon more historical knowledge there to then embed within that question. So it's a higher order skill used in year 8 level.
Yeah, and you can see it in that last question there as well, how these words are pulled straight from our curriculum. Explain the relationship between the different social groups as shown in the source. The first part of that is pulled straight from the curriculum. Students have to know the difference between the different social groups. We're just applying it to a source to make it that more source analysis focused question. Then moving on to year 9. So students know how to identify, describe, explain, but we've got these more complicated words coming in here. And just because, we're saying that students have sort of moved on from that identify and describe, doesn't mean that we won't ask questions. Of course, there'll be questions that ask students to identify and describe, which is really good for those students as well from that mixed ability sort of classroom that we all face. It just means that we're sort of building on that for those middle and higher end students in our classrooms. So asking them to compare, that's quite a challenging question, being able to look at 2 sources and then actually be able to compare the similarities and differences between them. We're starting to see words like analyse, and analyse is quite daunting for students to see. It involves a lot. It's not just one word, it's very loaded language that we've got there. So if we're introducing it at year 9, then by the time they get to year 11 and 12, they're more familiar with it and they understand sort of what it requires of them.
Even the term analyse, getting students at the year 9 level to actually have to think about, say, something like cause and effect. So what is the historical knowledge of things that are happening before this event, as well as during, and then the consequences of what's happening after. So therefore, they're possibly analysing the significance of these 2 moments in time versus what will happen next. So again, it's calling on students to place it within its historical period and have some sort of knowledge to talk about. I mean, the skill is to talk about what's happening before and after, as well as during those 2 different perspectives of possibly a moment in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And our expectations of students when they're analysing at year 9 is, very different to what we're expecting at year 12. But the fact that we're introducing them to the language early on is a really powerful tool for them. Next, we've got year 10. So we've got all those command terms at the top that hopefully they're really familiar with. They know how to do that. And then we've got a bit more complicated, a bit more VCE language like evaluate and analyse coming up. And I guess these questions here, they're often a bit of a trap for students, I guess, because they ask students, for example, how the treatment of the Germany in post-war treaties led to lasting conflict. Doesn't actually refer to the source in that question, but we know as history teachers, we want them to refer to that source. We want them to use the knowledge from that image there. So if they've got the identify, describe, explain skills, they're able to do that and able to approach a complicated word like evaluate a bit more easily.
And just the exposure to it, I mean, what you're going to hear a little bit later on from Kate as well, is that students from year 7 to 10 will get a list and a description of each of these command terms. And so hopefully that exposure to it means they know the skills that they're required to do from that question, so that when they're asked to evaluate something and asked to actually therefore have an argument, a judgment call behind what is happening, what has happened next, that they know that that's what they're required to do when they're given a question such as that. We see here coming up, there's this is an example from the 2020 Russian Revolution history exam from last year, 2020. This was a particular question I enjoyed, whereby my students came out of this one, and you even had a few students saying, I liked that it was about the Duma and Tsar Nicholas's involvement with the Duma. They felt that it was accessible. They knew what that was, that moment in history. But I remember hearing them comment saying, the problem I faced was I didn't know how to differ my answer between the three questions, because these three questions you can see here, that is the source analysis A, B, and C questions, so the 5, 5, 10. And so students didn't know how to differ using their evidence, for example, or their arguments between the three questions. And a lot of them said, oh, I feel like I just repeated the same evidence for each question. So again, here we're seeing a great example where students have to know what the command term is asking them to do, not just with that question, but with the skills that they have, their historical skills. Outline, are they just literally listing the reasons why Nicholas did that, versus the evaluate question, and therefore, again, having a judgment call and you analysing how it compares to other moments, and therefore how significant it was overall with the Dooms contributing to the revolution.
Yeah, I think the really powerful thing about these task words as well, these command words, is that it doesn't matter if they change the study design, which we know is happening next year. They're changing the study designs, they're changing the exam, but we know these words are going to pop up in there because they pop up in every curriculum, history curriculum. So it doesn't matter if they change, if we teach our year 7s these words now. By the time they get to year 12, there'll be a completely different study design again. But because they know how to evaluate, because they know how to explain and identify and all these task words that we've got, they're able to approach a new study design and a new exam.
So we'd like to hand back to Kate now, who's going to introduce the new series for Victorian curriculum. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Megan and Kirk. That was awesome. I really enjoy listening to you talk because you can really feel that passion that you have for developing skills. And of course, having taught from 7 all the way through to VCE, you know that if we can get in early with that, it really does pay off in the later years. So we're going to introduce you to our new covers and our new series, and I'll do a bit of a walkthrough of what's included. If we look here at the covers, you'll see that we've sort of moved away from the idea of faces in our previous edition and wanted to focus on students living and breathing within the world of humanities. So you can see some examples of historical places and geographical places on the screen there. We've also very confidently come out in the second edition as just Oxford Humanities rather than Oxford Big Ideas Humanities. It is a second edition, but we're really proud to confidently be Oxford Humanities, or Oxford Hums, as you see there on the cover. We also have on the next slide a example of our standalone economics and business, civics and citizenship book for years 9 and 10. And that idea of students living and breathing living and breathing humanities is no more evident than the civil action of gathering, protesting, which you see there on the screen. This standalone book at years 9 and 10 works as a bit of a flexible option for those of you who might be offering these subjects as electives in those later years. So we're going to go into a bit of a walkthrough to introduce some of the new and improved features of the Oxford Humanities series. And I say new and improved because we've worked really hard to marry the great elements that were in the previous editions, all the things that we know that teachers that we've spoken to really loved, but also taking on feedback about how we can improve some of what's included as well. So onto the next slide, we'll look at sort of an example of a few pages. So here you see a chapter opening page. We sort of call this our high impact, grab your students' attention page. And all of the authors, including Megan and Kirk, have done a great job of choosing really interesting, engaging, high impact images that get your students from the minute they open that chapter thinking, wow, what am I going to learn about in this chapter? You can see there's a clean and spacious new design, as well as the overarching questions that sort of guide the structure of the chapter. So, we take the content from the syllabus that can sometimes be a bit messily organized and work really hard to build it into a nice narrative or structure for a chapter that helps the students and also you as the teacher understand how to work through that chapter. So on to the next. You can see here on the top left-hand side of the screen that there's something we're quite excited about is learning outcomes. So there's a little box on each topic that say, in this topic you will, X, Y, Z. And those have been derived straight from the syllabus as well. So it really makes it easy for you guys to understand how the topic that you're teaching and how the topic that the students are working through relates to the curriculum content. You'll see here we've carried on our spread-based approach. So the idea that, one topic, one spread sometimes might go a bit longer, so we can have great full page illustrations or great full page pictures. But that idea of a sort of topic-based approach really helps you be able to cover that in class. You'll see on the right-hand side, we have new and improved case study features. We did have case studies in the previous edition, and I'm really pleased to say we've worked quite hard to update them to make the syllabus content come to life in the climate that we're currently living in. You can see they're a great example in the Year 9 civics section of the 2021 US Capitol riot. So really current, really up-to-date content to bring the books to life. As Kirk mentioned earlier as well, just below that, you'll see the little yellow panel, which is a visible thinking prompt. As Kirk was saying, these really encourage students to think critically and express what they see on the page and be able to communicate that with other students. So really fostering discussions in class, as well as sort of giving students some tools to approach what they see in the page and how they think about it. So on the next slide, you can see on the left-hand side, something we're also very excited about is having margin glossary terms on the page. So this is something that a lot of teachers that we spoke to through surveys or just, at the stand, at a conference or through emails and direct chats, that having a margin glossary on the page would really support students at different levels. So the first time that an unfamiliar term appears, it will be bolded in the text itself, and the little reference will appear in the margin. And these terms will also obviously be included in the glossary for the book, and also in quite an exciting online feature, which I'll talk about in a minute. On the right-hand side, speaking of skills, on the right-hand side, you can see a key skill box. So this is a new feature whereby we are able to talk about and introduce students to the concepts and skills that they need to master in context. So rather than thinking, oh gosh, I've got to plan a whole other lesson on how to analyze perspectives, you can see here they're learning, say in Year 7, about the role of women in ancient Rome. And in context, within that learning, within that discussion about women in ancient Rome, we have a ability to practice analyzing perspectives. You can see just below that as well, there's a little icon, which, and I will talk about this a bit more in a minute in terms of our digital features, but there's a little icon there that calls out some important or relevant features that appear on our digital platform. So as the teacher and the student knows that here they're learning about the role of ancient women in Rome, they can practice the skill of analysing perspectives, and they can also go online and practice it more through the features that we have on there. On the next slide, you can see on the right-hand side a key concept box. This is also something we did have in the previous editions to bring those concepts from the syllabus to life. And again, they appear in context with the discussion that's already happening within that topic. We have updated a range of these to, again, make them as recent and relevant and exciting as possible for students to be able to bring the syllabus content to life. And just below that, you'll see a check your learning box. And I know the font on the screen is probably quite small, but it's what Kirk and Megan have been speaking about throughout this session. We have introduced task words or command terms in these check your learning questions to help familiarise students with the terms. At Year 7 and 8, it's sort of they're peppered throughout with a nice balance of the who, what, when, where, why questions, which students probably already feel more comfortable with. So we're just sort of introducing them at Year 7 and 8. And again, the text on the screen is quite small, but you may be able to see that there are questions that are included at Year 7 and 8 that have a bit of hand holding to help them master these skills. So there is an analyze question in there on question 4, but it includes a bit of hand holding saying, you need to analyze this by doing X, Y, Z. And again, those instructions and that sort of glossary for the skills, the command terms rather, will also appear in the book and online. Next slide, please. Sorry, guys, can you move on to the next slide? Fab, thank you. So you can see here our rich tasks are back as well. These are really great. They offer a standalone sort of section to practice skills and also to offer some differentiation and depth as well. So you can see here we've got a key skill of historical writing or writing for history, and then the skill that they're practicing is being able to summarize their research. We've also included some sort of worked examples and annotated examples there to really support the students as they learn the skill. And down the bottom of the right-hand side page there as well, you can see that there's opportunity for extension, which creates more opportunity for differentiation. Even in all of those extend your understanding questions, they're not all high order, they're not all super academic. Any student at any level should be able to answer at least one of them and just extend their understanding of the subject that they have just worked on in that spread. Next slide, please. Great, and then something we're very excited about is that we have introduced a chapter review spread at the end of each chapter. So a nice little bookend to sort of summarize the summarize the content that they have learned throughout the chapter. You'll see on the left-hand side there are chapter review questions, which are organized under that nice structure from the chapter opener. So those big sort of overarching questions. Underneath them include a series of sort of revision questions. And on the right-hand side, there's a chapter review activity, which whether it's in history, geography, economics and business, or civics and citizenship, it always includes like a source or a stimulus material with some questions underneath it. All the questions on this spread include like a mark allocation, and there will be a marking rubric available through the OBOOK platform as well, so that you can really easily use this as sort of a custom inbuilt assessment. But there will also be a editable version of this online as well. So if you want to move the order of the questions around, add your own question in, whatever it may be, this is really designed to be yours and for you to make it your own. And on the bottom there, you can see a OBOOK Pro panel, which points out, again, the important digital resources for this chapter, so that as you work through it, you know that there's some really cool things online that you might like to bring into the classroom. Next slide, please. Great. Something else I thought that I'd mention is that at the very back of each book, so it's not interfering with the content that you're delivering, you know, the history chapters of the book or the geography chapters of the book, but at the very back of the book, each book from 7 to 10 also includes a STEAM project. So these are projects that have been really carefully designed to meaningfully address content from the humanities curriculum, but also in a way that fosters cross-curricular learning. So identical projects appear at the back of the Oxford Humanities book, the Oxford Science book, and the Oxford Maths book at each year level. But as I said, they really carefully do address humanities curriculum content, so that it gives you a bit of flexibility. If you just want to use that as is, you can for HUMS, or you can collaborate with your science and maths teachers. And of course, there is a comprehensive suite of teaching resources that will be available online for this, because we know it's no easy feat to do that. There'll be things like videos, teacher notes, assessments, implementation advice, and even more. Next slide, please. Great, so I've teased this a little bit, but we're really excited to have an enhanced digital platform. Rather than OBOOK Assess, which it was in the past, it's now OBOOK Pro, and it has a range of really brand new, exciting features that offer you the chance to engage your students, track their learning through interactive questions. The point that I really wanted to make here is that it's not just multiple choice questions. There are fun interactive artworks, there are fun drag and drop activities, as well as quizzes, multiple choice questions, things like that, really offering a full suite of fun, engaging activities. You can see on the right-hand side there that through this platform, you'll also be able to report and track your students' progress. So for example, one of the great reports that you'll be able to do in humanities is a curriculum report, and every activity that appears on that OBOOK Pro, whether it's a fun activity or a quiz or whatever it might be, will be sort of linked behind the scenes to a curriculum code, so that when you run this report, when you want to see how your students are sort of mastering different aspects of the curriculum or the whole you know, year 8 history curriculum as a whole, you'll be able to track that through how they've gone with these questions and these interactives. So it's very exciting. Next slide, please. And finally, on the digital, we're also really excited to let you know that we have partnered with Quizlet. I'm sure Quizlet is something that you are all familiar with, and you probably use in your classroom already. But we know that kids love it as well, and so we're really excited to be able to host expert authored content from the textbooks onto Quizlet. So there's a range of different study types that students can do on Quizlet to revise the terms from the textbook. Of course, one of the most exciting ones being games of Quizlet Live, which get kids really competitive and really excited about learning this content. So I think that is it for the product walkthrough. The next slide just has a quick overview of how we have worked really carefully to address the pinch points that Megan and Kirk outlined earlier. So I won't read this out to you verbatim. You can have a bit of a look at it. But essentially, we just wanted to say that whether it's addressing the skills and concepts, whether it is trying to make it a bit easier for you under the time crunch that you're under and working with mixed ability classrooms, we have really tried to use these three things as our sort of guiding principle to make sure that this book can be the best that it can be for you. Next slide, please. I think coming up, we've just got a bit of product information. So you can see that each standalone book, which also includes a login code for the student for the digital platform, is $65.95. Of course, there's a flexible digital only option, at $45.95. And then the Teacher O-Book Pro, which includes, your amazing wealth of teacher reference things like answers and teaching guides, course planners, things like that, is $299.95. I thought I'd also just touch on packs as well. If that STEAM project is something that appeals to you, we do have packs available that include a book of Oxford Humanities, Oxford Science, Oxford Maths, and Oxford My English, and they're very competitively priced, as you can see there. And of course, we also have our standalone Economics and Business, Civics and Citizenship book at 9 and 10, which is $54.95 for the standalone book. And you can see the rest of the prices on the screen there. So I think that takes us into the Q&A, yes, excellent. Okay, so let's have a look to see what questions have been provided. So, John Parishus asks, rather than an approach that separates skills and content, they are now intertwined. Megan and Kirk, do you guys want to field this, or would you like me to?
I'm happy to comment on it. Yes, I mean, honestly, I think they've always been intertwined. It's just not been possibly made explicitly clear. I think it's been a challenge for a lot of teachers to have to almost sometimes do it yourself, to make sure that whilst teaching content, you're reminded to teach the skills throughout as well. Again, I'm guilty of that too. When I was teaching even something year 12 history for the first time, same thing. You're forcing yourself to recall what's needed for the exam, and you just want to talk about content all the time. So I think it's just a reminder of that. It is necessary to intertwine the two.
Yeah, and I might jump in on top of that. I completely agree with you, Kirk. It's offering something that intertwines them, but you can see, like in our previous editions with those rich task spreads, we're still also dedicating, dedicated space to skills practice throughout the chapters, and also there will be a wealth of skills oriented activities available online as well. Joe Pantoni asks, Megan and Kirk, do you think the development of skills is more important than the mastery of the content itself in 7 to 10? What do you think?
Oh, good question. I think it's always a balancing act for us as history teachers, isn't it? Of course, it's important that students learn about the Holocaust or World War II or World War I. Of course, it's important they learn those things. Looking at the Rights and Freedoms Unit, of course, we want them to learn that information because, that helps them become global citizens and people that are out there in the real world. But I think that skills is what's going to carry them through. That's the consistent sort of theme that's going to be going throughout as well. So if we're talking from year level to year level, it's always going to be a balance. And there are going to be pieces of content which are more important than others. But those skills are always going to be there. They're going to be developed not just throughout the history curriculum, but also in different curriculums as well. I know for myself, I'm an English teacher as well, and I see so much crossover between the two, and the students pick up on those skills that are similar throughout the cross-curricular as well.
Hopefully just the skills. Skills is something that, again, we carry into the real world too. Not that the content we don't. We will refer to that content to ensure we don't repeat history throughout. But again, it's the skills and it's being able to analyze and evaluate yourself historical terms. So again, that's the real life application. So that's why we emphasize that as a clear importance of something to embed.
Yeah, that's a great point about carrying it into the real world. And I think as well, just touching on what Megan said, and you might find this as history teachers, people might think there's no prerequisite knowledge that kids need to carry in year on year. If you're studying ancient Egypt in year 7, you don't have to have any prerequisite to then go into medieval Europe in year 8. But I think what you guys have really illuminated is that it's the skills that become that prerequisite knowledge that kids can carry from unit to unit, from year to year, and then into the real world. Nicole Power asks, and I will answer the first half of this question and then handle it to you, Kirk. Has there been any extra consideration made for the mandated teaching of the Holocaust? So we do have a dedicated section on the Holocaust within our World War II chapter, which Kirk actually authored for this edition. So he can tell you about, you know, and I can say, having gone through the pages, there's a lot of information and some great activities in there on that, and treated really sensitively by you, Kirk, as well, having authored it. So.
Thank you, Kate. I guess to answer your question as well, the main emphasis there was to ensure there are 3 rich tasks for each chapter. And one of those rich tasks, of course, was dedicated to the Holocaust, so that students are not just understanding the material, but again, they're doing something with it. And the 3 rich tasks usually emphasize something of key importance or understanding that's required as well. So yes, one of the rich tasks is dedicated to teaching of the Holocaust.
Yeah, content as well has been updated, because while the Holocaust was a long time ago, we find out new information and new things come to light, or new stories come to light as well. So of course that's been updated as well.
Absolutely, and there are some great, not to tease to the audience, but there are some great sources that you've put in there that relate to that as well. So look, I think the other types of questions that are appearing in the chat just seem to be about forthcoming page proofs and the structure of things, which our Oxford team will handle in the chat, and we'll also make sure that you can be in touch with your Oxford's education consultants if you need to ask them these questions one-on-one. I think we've got their details on an upcoming slide, if you guys wouldn't mind just flicking across. Yes, so here are the details of the secondary education consultants in Victoria. If you don't know who your consultant is, please feel free to drop your name in the chat and we can take a list of them and have your consultant get in touch with you. But they will be able to answer all your questions regarding the dates for page proofs and be able to supply you with sample chapters and also keep you informed about what's coming next. So I think that's it for today. Like I said, if you need anything more from us, drop your name in the chat and we'll follow up. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending. And of course, a big virtual round of applause to Megan and Kirk for taking us through today.